there's been possibly no international crisis that has acquired as much interest as what is happening in Bangladesh at this point in time. Joining us to unpack what the diplomatic implications of this crisis will be for Bangladesh, for India, as well as the much talked about role of the Western powers in what has been going on in Bangladesh. I have with me Ambassador Pinak Chakravarti, who has been India's High Commissioner to Dhaka in the past, someone who writes very, very frequently on Bangladesh and knows the country extremely well. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me. You were India's High Commissioner in Bangladesh. Can you begin by telling us a little bit about how you think the present crisis is going to impact the country more broadly, but also do you foresee this having any impact on the foreign relations of Bangladesh, the crisis, and what moves forward in Bangladesh?
Well, Bangladesh, in my view, has entered a period of instability, and so hence it will impact on everything. Their domestic and economic policies as well as foreign policy. But it's too early to tell. But I see there will be some continuity in certain issues because that are vital to Bangladesh. For example, their garment industry, which will need support and supplies from different countries, including India. But yes, there will be, I foresee a period of instability, uncertainty, and even because their first, I think, task is to ensure that the domestic, law and order situation is tackled. Because I don't know if you know, but the police has refused to come back to work because of the violence and the fact that they have lost a lot of people also during the mob violence. So I think these are the main tasks at the moment to bring the country back on track, back to life back to normal. And of course, after that there'll be many things to do.
Understood. And Ambassador, if I could ask you to begin and just talk to us a little bit about what happens in terms of India's view of the crisis. Many people, of course, speculating that this is, of course, an unremarkable development, the fall of Sheikh Hasina in Dhaka for India, given that she was such a stable part of India's neighborhood policy for the last 15 years. How do you see this, the impact of this crisis for India's foreign policy, India's neighborhood policy? You had the famed expert C. Raja Mohan talk about India's Near East policy and how now with Myanmar, of course, Luki's policy, of course, with Myanmar also in political turmoil, Bangladesh also in political turmoil, that it makes those very key foreign policy initiatives for India that much harder. What would be your view on the impact of the Bangladesh crisis on India's foreign policy?
Well, it's not good news for India because any instability in our neighborhood does impact on us, and particularly Bangladesh, where we, people tend to then, when trouble starts there, there's a flow of people coming into India, and then we'll have to look after them. Then we'll have to see how best to help them to bring back stability, and which we will be willing to do, I'm sure. But then they have to decide on their policies because on how to go about it. And this is an interim government which is kind of neither here nor there. I don't know how long it will last, and whether it is some people have told me that there is no provision for an interim government in the constitution. So technically speaking, the government has no legal sort of a basis, and it is simply a kind of an emergency thing that has happened. They have put together, some people who will be called advisors. As you know, they won't be called ministers; they'll be called advisors. And the chief advisor is none other than their only Nobel laureate, Peace Prize winner, Professor Muhammad Yunus, who's famous for his work on microfinance and used to run a large microfinance bank called the Grameen. So I think it's too early to tell. And Professor Yunus is a respected and well-regarded figure, but he has never been in government. And and is not basically a politician, though he has made forays into politics unsuccessfully earlier. So I think we'll have to just wait and watch, and the government of India will be doing that. And of course, the violence that is going on has to stop, and that would be the first priority.
Understood. So, if I can ask you something about India's handling of Bangladesh over the last couple of years, of course, there has been an expansive agenda that has been unveiled with Bangladesh when it comes to re-establishing connectivity. An ambitious initiative to have more connectivity with India's northeast and Bangladesh. Of course, lots of development work that went on between the two countries as well. So, an expansive agenda on the one hand, but also there is some criticism that India sort of was aware that there was growing resentment towards Sheikh Hasina on the ground, and increasingly it seemed like India was being more and more closely associated with the Sheikh Hasina government. There was an anti-India campaign, with a sort of a variant of the India Out campaign against India, precisely because of its links with Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League government. And there has been some criticism you hear coming from some sections of the Indian commentariat as well as from people in Dhaka that India was seen as too closely associated with the Sheikh Hasina government and unwilling to engage with the BNP and other players in Bangladeshi politics. Do you think that's fair criticism, that India put all its eggs in one basket, as is a phrase that is being popularly used right now to describe India's Bangladesh policy? Do you think that's fair criticism?
I know these phrases are hurled around very often, and in my view, we were working with the Hasina government basically mostly on the economic track. Putting together various energy requirements, helping Bangladesh meet its energy requirements, then connectivity proposals, and speeding up and facilitating trade. And also, we got help from the Bangladeshis to, for transit trade and transshipment trade, etc. Now, if you look at the figures and the economic performance of Bangladesh, nobody can fault Hasina in terms of the growth in bilateral trade, or I'm talking about trade and in bilateral issues. The internal, GDP and foreign reserves, etc., global debt, etc., may have gone up, and GDP, of course, went up. Bangladesh performed very well, and I don't know, you will be surprised to know that Bangladesh was in a much better position than Pakistan, which is a much bigger country. It had a higher GDP, higher per capita, greater reserves, bigger exports. All this happened. Of course, things went down a bit because of the Ukraine war and the rising, energy and food prices. That affected Bangladesh, and it did hammer its economy to a large extent. So that created a lot of other problems like greater unemployment, and so those were problems that existed, and we knew. I suppose everybody who monitors the economy would know. The criticism that we put all our eggs in one basket. One has to look at which are the other baskets available. You work with the government of the day, and we don't interfere in internal elections. Now we are being blamed that why didn't we interfere? If you interfere, then you are the bad boy, and so it was a no-win situation for us. That if you interfere, you are in trouble. If you don't interfere, you will hear things like intelligence failure, wrong foreign policy, etc. These things happen. Our neighborhood is not exactly very stable. And so I think what we have worked with similar governments before. It's not that we have not seen such. When I was High Commissioner in 2007, we had a caretaker government, and it came into place with similar kind of a background. Although this time the context is different. It is a students' agitation. That time the country had come to a standstill because of political street fighting between the two major parties. Now this context is different indeed, and but here again, Um, there are other players in the sense that why it happened, how it happened, and who were sort of interested in making it succeed. There are many more players in this.
Understood, sir. So, if I may ask you, and forgive me for pushing you on this slightly, there is some sense though that on particular occasions there were of course a lot of reporting coming out saying that India was trying to relieve some of the diplomatic pressure on Bangladesh when it came to the United States, privately using diplomatic channels to tell the United States that look, should Sheikh Hasina move on and you put too much pressure on her on human rights and democracy, then you may unleash other forces in Bangladeshi politics that you simply do not want to see, and that will not be in the interests of India and the United States. You had, of course, those private diplomatic conversations. There was that sense that diplomatically India was using its heft to sort of shield the Hasina government at some levels. There was some conversation about how the Election Commission of India certified an election in 2024 earlier this year that much of the Bangladeshi establishment and the people saw widely as illegitimate and authoritarian. So there was this sense that in fact, this could, while of course we should not put all our eggs in one basket and we should not resort to simplistic criticisms, there was this sense that knowing that there was growing dissatisfaction against Sheikh Hasina on the ground, we still put our diplomatic and political capital and even the names of our institutions like the Election Commission behind what the Sheikh Hasina government was doing. And now, of course, the government has fallen apart, and therefore the street reputation of India in some senses has suffered. At least that's what we're hearing from Bangladesh. Do you have a sense of, do you have a response to this or this line of argument?
Well, let me explain that the Election Commission officials are always invited to oversee under some regional arrangements. They go there for a few days when the polling takes place. They are taken to the polling stations. They see whether the voting process is going on. They don't make a value judgment on what is happening or the political ambience in which all this happens. To say that the Election Commission was used to rubber stamp the Bangladeshi election, I think is a complete fallacy, and I would urge that journalists and others not to go down that road, because the Election Commission cannot influence these things. They go there as observers, and they see what they are shown, and they make a judgment on what they see as to whether the elections. Now, you said that we knew that some of these things were happening, but what was the alternative? And as far as the US is concerned, I think US opened its cards quite some time back by generally trying to put pressure on Hasina, calling her undemocratic, calling her authoritarian dictator and lack of freedom, some muzzling of dissent, etc. Now, America, with all its qualities, has a foreign policy which is basically based on its own interest. And they were unhappy with Hasina for a variety of things. And generally with Hasina, they have not had a very cordial relationship. And for various historical and other reasons. And during the last 15 years, they felt that their proteges, who are the opposition, the Americans have always supported the BNP and the Jamaat. As that is their preference. They think they are a better combination in terms of maybe doing their bidding or whatever, the more pliable, or they can get work done because they are there. Plus their animosity towards Hasina, which was quite apparent. Then they started applying certain pressures like sanctions on officials, sanctions on open-ended sanctions that said anybody trying to rig the election will not receive a US visa, etc. So those were the visa sanctions. So this is the kind of thing that preceded all this. And so it was very clear to most of us that the Americans wanted Hasina out. And that was also, they made that clear, even I think in our diplomatic talk, which I am not privy to, but I understand that was discussed, and they also made a plea. Then they talked about human rights and all that stuff, which they do usually when they want to apply pressure. But then it goes off the table when their own kind of government comes to power, etc. So they seem to be happy. If you look at their statement, they have welcomed the formation of the new government. Professor Yunus is known to be, and this is not a secret, very, very close to the Americans. So the Americans actually today probably have a kind of government, well, they couldn't probably, I suppose, they have a government which is headed by somebody who they know very well, who is close to them, and the composition of the government also is something that to me, because I know many of them, to me seems that they're not neutral in the sense that they will be anti-Awami League, and some of that will brush off on us because they will say you were supporting the Awami League, etc. So that is the situation.
So if I may ask you to lay that out a little bit more as my final question to you, in terms of the role that you see that Western countries have played, it has attracted not a little bit of criticism in India from suggestions of a covert role in making something like this happen to, as you were mentioning, their repeated interventions, at least from America, on the state of Bangladesh's human rights, while not saying the same thing about Pakistan. There was that criticism being made that there's some hypocrisy here. There was also a lot of conversation about the asylum policies of different countries and so on and so forth. For example, if you have a President Musharraf, a military dictator of Pakistan, find their way to London, why not for Sheikh Hasina? So, and simply just a lot of criticisms floating around about the Western policy here. My question to you is, could you describe a little bit more, some of this criticism that is coming in of Western countries in terms of their decision making on Bangladesh, as well as how you see this impacting the India-US relationship, given that, of course, this is something that's very critical to India as a core national security and diplomatic interest in its own neighborhood and its own backyard. Could I ask you to just close out by explaining those two things?
Yes, you can see the reluctance of the Western countries to, let's say, give refuge to Hasina. The US promptly revoked her visa, and the UK has gone into some legal waffling about, whether she can come here, whether she can seek asylum, and all that. But Tariq Rahman, the deputy leader of the opposition, has been sitting in exile in London since 2007, when the then caretaker government put him in jail and then offered, look, you can come out of jail if you leave the country. So that was the deal then. So he went off and has since lived and tried to manage the party from there. And clearly they were not in a position. They knew they couldn't win the election, so they boycotted the election. There were other reasons also. Tariq Rahman in London perhaps did not want the elections to be held because he couldn't participate because he was sentenced to long prison terms and would have been arrested if he had come back. So now we will see what they will do to. The BNP wants him back to be in the country to lead the party. His mother is very ill, so who's the chairman? Former Prime Minister Khalida Zia. She may not be able to get into the hurly-burly of politics anymore. She's not very hard. So I think the Western whatever animosity or dislike of Hasina was quite open, and now you are seeing the collateral aspect of it in terms of not allowing her to travel there and that kind of thing.
Understood.
Now, one of the other things, of course, is that some people are saying that they were worried about Sheikh Hasina becoming too close to China. And then, of course, Sheikh Hasina herself gave an explosive interview saying that, making no bones about, without mentioning which the country was, that they wanted an air base in St. Martin's Island, which I refused. Then she said many other things, which blaming them for trying to destabilize. So I think the China factor came into play also. And because, as you know, the Indo-Pacific and the American policy towards China is now fairly open, that China is their main competitor and the main sort of, what shall we say, you know, the competitor, and the one who is like a bit of a, what Soviet Union used to be at one time. So China is the main sort of rival, I could say. I won't say enemy, but main rival, and the whole geopolitics now revolves around how to deal with China, etc. And for that, Bangladesh is important because the Bay of Bengal is important, and that is why they were probably looking for something, some kind of base.
Understood.
So that is what happened also, and Hasina being very, very independent and neutral would not have given them that. Now the interesting thing is that will the new government give it to the Americans? So that is what is a $1 million question.
Understood. Ambassador, thank you so much. I'm so obliged to you for answering my questions, for laying out both some of the inadequacies in terms of the prevailing narrative and how Bangladesh is being covered, pointing out new facts for us to consider, as well as what impact the Bangladesh crisis will have on the country, on India, on its relationship with Western countries, and how the West is looking at this crisis as well. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And thank you, viewers, for watching India Today Global.